tremendous amount of growth over the last, let's say, 10 years in jiu-jitsu in America has been the sports side, the IB, JJF, and all the different subtype grappling tournaments that are out these days. Mm-hmm. So jiu-jitsu is its own culture, bump fist, the shaka, interesting rash guards, people having, camo gis, pink gis, Ninja Turtle gis, and, not knocking it. It's a wonderful thing. And I'm glad that it's grown so much. And I think sport jiu-jitsu is super fun. I did tournaments way back in the day. Nothing wrong with it. It's great. Sure. But certainly most schools in America today are not teaching in a way that they wear like a traditional kimono, where there's bowing, where there's a sense of etiquette and that martial etiquette that we all have come up with and was part of judo, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu at the Gracie Academy back in Rio, and even an elements of that in Torrance.
Master Jason, great to have you on the show. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself for some of my students that don't know who you are?
Yes, certainly. I'm a 5th degree black belt in Kuk-Sul Do, also a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu black belt professor and a brown belt in judo. Lifelong sort of learner and martial arts instructor like yourself. I've been running a professional martial arts school for 25 years now and studying martial arts for 30 years. So this is my passion, my livelihood, and the way that I love to spend my time.
That's awesome. So before we get started, I want to tell a little story, and then I'm going to get to asking you a lot of questions about yourself. But I think it's kind of a funny story, and it's how I initially reached out and connected with you.
Sure.
I remember when I was in high school, I started training in Taekwondo when I was a little boy, like 5 years old, and I went through several masters. But when I was with my second master there in Solon, Ohio, who I believe you know, Master Kim Kwan.
Absolutely, yeah, nice guy.
Taekwondo.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I was training there, and I had a friend who actually ended up training at your school, and we used to walk home from school every day, and you had just started your school in the basement of like, I don't know, it was a deli or something. I remember where it was. Was that your original school down like kind of in the basement?
Yeah, wow, that's old school. I mean, I started off, I had a school in the basement of Wembley Club, and then I moved to South Franklin Street in this very small little building that I think you're referring to, because from the back parking lot, it was recessed down, it was like a basement. That's old school for sure.
Yeah, and I remember my friend was like, yeah, I'm gonna stop in there and try out his class, and I was very impressed from what I heard from my friend right away. He'd tell me about how hardcore your black belt testings were and how seriously you took the martial arts. And my particular friend was kind of a wild guy. I don't know if you remember him. His name was Mike McClurg. And
I certainly do. He's gone on to do some interesting things in life.
Yeah, he was in the military and stuff. But anyway, we got really into like sword fighting one summer, and he's like, I can, my instructor is telling me about the shinai. He says they're indestructible. I'm going to buy one for myself. You want me to buy you one? And I was like, sure, yeah. And so he bought a shinai from you, and I paid him for it and stuff. And that whole summer we spent sword fighting with our shinais. And I still have that shinai to this day. It's the shinai I have in my dojo that I discipline all my students with. And it was just, small world. I thought I'd reach out to you and see how you were doing and tell you, that I still have that sword that I got from you 20 years ago.
That's honestly incredible. That's a great story. And it definitely conjures up some wonderful memories of the old days for sure. It's incredibly cool. Very, very cool. And yeah, Master Kwan that you trained with, I'm sure you said you had several different masters over the years, but he still runs a dojang here in the Solon, Ohio area, maybe multiple locations. And, he's always been a great guy. So very interesting.
Yeah, I'm still very close with him. I bring him out for testing sometimes, and he's actually coming in just later this month for testing. So
that's super. You got to let him know I said hello for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you started out in Kuk-Sul Do, like 30 years ago or something, or?
I did. And actually, when I first started off, over 30 years ago. It was in Kuk Sool, which I'm sure you know, and maybe some of your students and viewers. It's they're like an offshoot of Hapkido, with some other things added to it. So I started off at a local dojang, a couple towns over, ex-Marine Corps combat veteran, was running a small program, and I, coming from a semi-athletic background and, a young boy just interested in martial arts, as soon as I found that school and found that martial art, I was hooked instantly. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so it was pretty incredible.
And then how did you get into Kuk Sool Do? You said you started in Kuk Sool Won and then you got into Kuk Sool Do?
Yeah, exactly. So through the Kuk Sool Won, that's a bigger organization, as you might know. They had really their heyday during the mid 80s up to through the 90s. They really grew. They had schools all over the world. And with that would come large, competitions that they would do in various cities across the country. So I got my black belt in Kuk Sool Won, was very involved with their seminar tour and their competition circuit, and really loved it. But as that organization was really growing at a rapid rate, I felt the need to find a bit more traditional training. It's just what suited me more, what I liked a bit more. So I started researching masters that maybe at one point were part of Kuk Sool Won, who had, broken off and started their own kwans or came from very similar backgrounds. And that led me to Kuk Sool Do, which is really no different technically than Kuk Sool Won. It's just more of a different governing body and a different grandmaster that's running it. In fact, the grandmaster Chun Sik Yang, who's out of San Jose, California, originally from Busan, was part of the Kuk Sool Won master machine, back in the 1960s and 70s, and was one of the highest ranking Kuk Sool Won members. And at that time, it wasn't as sort of compartmentalized as it is today. It was, listen, a bunch of masters came together. They started to put together indigenous martial arts of Korea, and they all were kind of training together. The one master in Yuksa went to the United States, kind of trademarked everything. It became really known as his martial art. And some of the masters that came over to help out in the 1970s eventually, wanted to go their own way, do things their own way. It's inevitable, as we know, in martial arts. It happens a lot. And Grandmaster Chun Sik Yang in the late 1980s, he's one of the last masters to leave, founded his Kuk Sool Do Federation. And I ended up basically finding him through a friend who was living in Chicago at the time and heard of a school that was in Chicago teaching a Kuk Sool variant and told me about it. And then I started to research. This is like pre-internet time. We're talking like 1994, where, the internet was around, but it just wasn't like it is today. And I ended up actually contacting that gentleman who was running a school under Master Yang in Kuk Sool Do in like the Damon Avenue, and then also one in St. Charles area in a western suburb. Started training with those guys and, living on their couch and, learning Kuk Sool Do, their version of it. And then eventually I met Grandmaster Chun Sik Yang through them. And that was maybe 1995. And I've been with him since. I've been with Master Yang ever since, still to this day.
That's awesome. I love to hear those stories of loyalty where you find the right master and you can really be a good disciple and whatnot.
Doing my best.
Yeah, that's cool. It's interesting too, because I feel like a lot of my students probably don't know this, but Taekwondo and Kuk Sool Won kind of come out of that same renaissance in Korean culture right after World War II, where they've been stripped of all their culture by the Japanese, and they were trying to find what is their martial art. And they had Taekyon and some of these traditional martial arts, but a lot of the best practitioners were actually trained in Japanese martial arts like judo and karate. And in the early days of Taekwondo has become very much a unique art form in itself. But if you go back far enough, it's very similar to Kuk Sool Won, like in its kind of composition. You have a lot of judo and a lot of Hapkido influences and stuff. A lot of the joint manipulation stuff was in Taekwondo in those early days. And traditional martial arts schools like myself kind of try to keep that alive. But unfortunately, a lot of more modern Taekwondo schools, they just really focus on only the kicking as opposed to, the full suite of self-defense that you need to defend yourself.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's the same history. Even like I said, this is a variant of like a Hapkido. And again, the original like Hapkido, Che Yong Sul, and they're coming from a background of studying some wonderful Japanese martial arts and then importing them back into Korea. And then, of course, over the years, they take on a more Korean influence or some of the cultural aspects. They add things. It has become its own unique Korean martial art, but the roots are a little bit different, in the beginning. And it's our best attempt to try to preserve these arts the way they were taught to us and to keep them going for generations to enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'd mentioned that you had gotten to Kukso Wan and then you kind of found Kukso Do. It sounds a little bit similar to how you found jiu-jitsu. And I know you're kind of on the cusp of starting a new jiu-jitsu program at your school. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey through jiu-jitsu and what's kind of led you to start your school now?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I had my dojang for, let's say, 10 years, and it grew almost in a sense beyond my expectations by the time. And I was very, very fortunate, had a lot of students, a great program here in Chagrin Falls, suburb of Cleveland. And I was around a 4th degree black belt in Kukso at the time, and just looking for some new challenges. Not that there wasn't so much more growth in Kukso, there certainly was. Again, I'm doing it to this day, but I was looking at some of the more practical aspects of fighting. At the time, the Ultimate Fighter show was coming out. The UFC had gone from the original Gracie jiu-jitsu or Gracie sort of infomercial, and I mean that in a positive way, to showcase their beautiful art. They had sold it. It went through all that, crazy fighting brawl type stuff that I didn't really appeal to me, to becoming more of a legitimate sport. And so all of this was interesting to me. And as a martial artist, I was interested in, hey, can I really apply this amazing technique that I've worked so hard for? And jiu-jitsu seemed a bit appealing to me. I had always had a fondness for jiu-jitsu. I was always grappling at my school, did a little bit of wrestling in the past, and was, again, just interested in those practical elements of fighting. But there really wasn't a big jiu-jitsu scene, at least that I knew of, in our area. I was very much in my own world, between, California and here in Cleveland, with just Korean martial arts and those fighting scenes and jiu-jitsu just weren't, I wasn't looking at them at the time. So in 2006, I found a legitimate Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, a Hoyler Gracie affiliate here in Cleveland. It was a bit of a haul for me. It's about 45 minutes from my actual dojang here in the Cleveland Heights area. So I just decided one day to give it a shot, and decided as a school owner with hundreds of students and a 4th degree black belt that I was going to step on the mat as a white belt and start doing a little bit of jiu-jitsu. And when I went to that school, I was instantly impressed with the effectiveness of the technique, and started training in jiu-jitsu. That was like 2006. And competed with that program, and that school ended up hiring that instructor to train and teach at my academy here. Ended up creating a fight gym separate from my dojang here. It was attached to it, an annex of it, but would have a different culture and flavor, of course, because it was an MMA gym, and I wanted to keep my traditional Kukso Do school exactly that, a traditional a dojang where we would represent that art. And the jiu-jitsu, I mean, it's a long story, my friend. Basically, I could talk forever about this, but I loved jiu-jitsu back in 2006. When we started the fight gym, it was jiu-jitsu and, of course, MMA. So we were teaching and studying Muay Thai, traditional American boxing, a lot of no-gi jiu-jitsu, and we had an octagon, a cage. We had everything. It was a very legit fight gym. And through that process, started this also with my friend who's also a Chagrin graduate. We've talked about, Scott Burr, who's an outstanding jiu-jitsu practitioner. Yeah, he was one of my Kukso Do students. Also, like I said, went to Chagrin Falls High School.
If I could interrupt for a second, I reached out to him recently. You kind of tipped me off to him, and I said hi. He's a writer, right? Apparently.
Exactly.
You probably know. And I actually went to school for writing, and I really want to publish a book at some point. And so I was like, man, I should reach out to this guy. And when I was looking at him, I was like, oh my gosh, I went to school with you. I think he was one grade above me, and Chagrin Falls is not a big school. We had like 150 people in a class. So
exactly.
It's kind of funny that we didn't know each other.
That's crazy. And yeah, he was one of those, just like your friend McClurg, who became one of my students and was a standout student, no question about it. And he came back after he graduated from Colorado College, was very interested in also like jiu-jitsu and fighting and MMA. So, I started the fight gym. He was right there with me, training in the jiu-jitsu, ended up becoming really good at it. And, I kind of brought him on, hey, you can start to run the fight gym at this point, and started, reduced our instructor expenses so he could take over those duties. And then he and I started this incredible journey in jiu-jitsu, because it became the love or the natural byproduct of the MMA training, where we became a bit disenchanted with the overall MMA scene and the culture around MMA, at least at the time. As traditional martial artists, at first it seems a bit exciting and you want to get involved with that. It's something new, it's something fresh. But then we started to feel, this isn't quite us. We're not Affliction t-shirt wearing, tap out, fight. You're watching it at the BW3s locally. It just wasn't our scene. I'm not knocking anyone who was into MMA at the time, but it just, as a traditional martial artist, I think you can relate. It just wasn't the culture that I was brought up in. And so Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, being a very classy, wonderful martial art and can be taught very traditionally, became our love and what we wanted to pursue out of that project or endeavor. And so by the time we were around blue belt, purple belt maybe in jiu-jitsu, we really started to focus in on that. And that led us to, our time with legendary folks like Steve Maxwell in jiu-jitsu, and many other high-level practitioners that I've been fortunate enough to train with. And the rest is sort of history. We really took off with that, and I think worked really hard, put ourselves in the right position, and also got maybe perhaps a bit lucky to be where we're at right now with our relationships with some really prominent jiu-jitsu folks.
And you got your black belt from Henner Gracie or somebody?
I got my black belt I got my black belt from Steve Maxwell. And for those that don't know, Steve Maxwell was one of the original American practitioners of jiu-jitsu in America. He was Rorion Gracie's, which is Henner's father, who started the UFC, and Horion's the guy that started basically jiu-jitsu in America for the Gracie family. Steve graduated one of the first to graduate from his instructor training program at the original legendary academy in Torrance, Gracie Academy. Steve had the first jiu-jitsu academy on the East Coast before Renzo Gracie. He was at the first UFC, and also Royce Gracie's original strength and conditioning coach for the first UFCs. I mean, Steve is just a legendary practitioner. So he's the gentleman that gave me all my belts actually in jiu-jitsu, from blue, purple, brown, and I was fortunate enough to be his second black belt in America, or second black belt period. Scott Burr, we mentioned, professor, being his first, and Steve's a great guy. I've been able to train all over though. I mean, Chris Howder, Hickson Gracie, I mean, you name it, I've been able to train with some interesting folks.
Man. It's kind of what happens over the years. Can you tell me about your new program? And
certainly,
I assume that's going to be more in line with the kind of traditional BJJ.
Exactly. So it comes from this. As I mentioned before, the fight gym was, originally an MMA gym that became a jiu-jitsu academy that mostly, our friend Scott Burr was heading up and running, and that was the project. About a year ago or so, we closed the fight gym, and Scott went off to do some more private training. He wasn't interested in teaching the public at this point, very interested in writing and, teaching a very small private group. And I finally decided that I would like to utilize my education, all of my experience in jiu-jitsu, and start sharing it with the public. And this academy that I'm going to be doing is going to be uniquely my academy, taught the old sort of traditional Gracie way, which I think is interesting, because if these days, the tremendous amount of growth over the last, let's say, 10 years in jiu-jitsu in America has been the sports side, the IB, JJF, and all the different sub-type grappling tournaments that are out these days. So jiu-jitsu is its own culture, bump fists, the shaka, interesting rash guards, people having, camo gis, pink gis, Ninja Turtle gis, and, not knocking it. It's a wonderful thing, and I'm glad that it's grown so much, and I think sport jiu-jitsu is super fun. I did tournaments way back in the day. Nothing wrong with it. It's great.
Sure.
But certainly most schools in America today are not teaching in a way that they wear like a traditional kimono, where there's bowing, where there's a sense of etiquette and that martial etiquette that we all have come up with and was part of judo, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu at the Gracie Academy back in Rio, and even an elements of that in Torrance back in the day when it first came over. So I was very interested in this new chapter when the fight gym closed, saying, listen, as a traditional martial artist, as a Gracie representative, I can offer the traditional self-defense curriculum, a sense of my own personality and traditional background with the highly effective Gracie Jiu-Jitsu technique. And also I've got a background in, like I said, Kodokan Judo and the Judo elements as well, giving you that Japanese flavor as well, which is, of course, very traditional. And I was very excited to start offering this to the public as a new chapter and a new way for me to grow and to continue to be stimulated as a martial arts instructor. And again, it's going to be very niche because, as I said, most of the growth and most of what you see these days with jiu-jitsu is going to be that sport end. You look on YouTube and it's a lot of people starting off and sitting on the ground and rolling around in these intricate, gi and lapel games and spinning on their heads. And again, sometimes not even doing takedowns, just both people sitting and scooting on their rear ends and engaging. Yeah. And this is not the jiu-jitsu that I fell in love with. Again, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just a new evolution of a traditional art. It's the sport evolution or the sport branch of a very traditional art. And when I first saw, we were talking back to the old original UFCs and the Gracies, as a traditional martial artist in 1993, when I watched the first UFC live in 93, I was like, whoa, I didn't go how I expected. I didn't expect grappling to overcome things. I didn't expect people from Brazil doing martial arts. At the time, honestly, I had not heard of capoeira, but I didn't really know about Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And it was like everyone else, it kind of turned everyone on its head. So I thought, wow, this is really, really incredible. And you're seeing this highly effective martial art practiced by someone who doesn't look particularly tough, who's smaller, skinnier, and able to overcome these much larger, stronger people. So that's the jiu-jitsu that I have a black belt in, that I love, and that I want to pass on. It's not the sport variant. And so my school is going to be that sort of old school Gracie Academy. The Valente brothers in Miami have a great representation of this. The Gracie brothers, Henner and Hiron, Hori and Sons, do a great job out in Beverly Hills and Torrance. I mean, there are certainly folks like us that are passing it on, but we are a very small minority compared to the massive growth of the sport jiu-jitsu. So this is my mission now and what I'm most passionate about.
That's awesome. I really wish you the best of luck in that. I mean, I feel I resonate with a lot of the things you're saying, especially with the sport jiu-jitsu. I see a lot of parallels to Taekwondo sport, which has become pretty much all encompassing now. I mean, I feel like, without getting too deep into that, like, Koreans are really obsessed with anything that gets to the world stage. And so
Sure.
When Taekwondo got to the world stage, they completely realigned the focus of Taekwondo to Taekwondo sport as opposed to Taekwondo for self-defense. I mean, Taekwondo was created for the Korean military, still practiced by them today, and it was originally designed for self-defense. And now it's become just so focused on sport, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I definitely have competed in Taekwondo at all levels of play, but not the Olympics, but the
Sure.
other levels, and I enjoy it, but the rules have become so contrived now that it's very hard for me to even figure out how to play the game. We have, it used to be, you get 1 point, you kick them in the body, you kick them in the head, just 1 point, and it's very simple. Then it was like you get 2 points to kick them in the head. Now it's like, you do this specific kick, jumping versus standing, and you get this many points. It's like, I mean, it's just so complicated when it's like that. And then self-defense is so much more organic than that. Like you can't even say this is a kick. Like it could just be some kind of weird jab coming out somewhere. And when you really try to cookie cutter and melt everything down so minutely, it really destroys the creativity aspect of combat. And so.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's exactly what's happening. It's of course, like you said, it's taekwondo, it's judo, it's jiu-jitsu, it's anything that MMA these days is different than it used to be, or pride rules. Anytime you emphasize or reward the sport aspect of it, it takes on its own unique evolution and flavor, and in many cases loses the fight identity or the fight element. And that's exactly what you see in jiu-jitsu. Listen, if you're a high level, amazing, alpha male competitor doing sport jiu-jitsu, could you defend yourself on the street? Of course, because you're just an athlete. You're strong, you're fast, you're tough. But could you teach sport jiu-jitsu to your, little sister, your mother, someone who's very, very small and weak, and get the same sort of self-defense results? My honest opinion is no. And so this is where we get into a bit of a debate. So I believe that the original Gracie Jiu-Jitsu is exactly meant for the weaker, meant for someone who's smaller, based on leverage, the idea of staying safe, not being able to be hurt or destructed or tap out or get beat up, and to be able to overcome a much larger, stronger, aggressive opponent. And many of the folks that are just walking into a jiu-jitsu school these days are doing it because they want to learn some self-defense. And in my opinion, what they're going to be learning in the sport venue is not going to give them those skills. They're going to be good at rolling around on the ground with people in the academy, but are they going to have the ability to close the distance if they need to? Are they going to have the ability to be proficient on their feet in the clinch? Are they going to understand how to deal with strikes when they're coming, both standing and on the ground? If you never practice it, there's no way you're going to be able to deal with those threats live. So my, again, mission is to be able to give a jiu-jitsu as it was originally intended for everyone. I'm going to be teaching 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. I have women's self-defense programs, adults of all walks of life. If someone wants to come in, amazing, strong athlete, wonderful, we're going to teach you jiu-jitsu. You're going to be that much better. If you're someone who is an accountant or like a tech guy who has never done any sports in his life, but you want to be empowered and know how to defend yourself, we're going to have you covered. And I think that's, again, what the original jiu-jitsu was intended to be, as a martial art. I love it all. I think it's all cool, but this is my passion and what I want to pass on. And I think the best way that I can serve the public and the martial arts community, and also to represent the jiu-jitsu that I love the very best.
Absolutely. When I've been doing jiu-jitsu a long time too.
That's right.
I ranked as you, but I've had a very political and like kind of all over the place sort of experience. But I started in 2000, I think.
Long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. I started in a mixed martial arts program trained by a blue belt, and I was there for like 3 years, and I learned a lot of the fundamentals and got a lot of experience rolling. And then I don't need to go through my whole story, but I trained under like 6 or 7 different people over the course of my experience. And I, like you, kind of came into the martial arts at the time where like UFC was just starting out. I remember the very first, UFCs that were televised on pay-per-view, and going with my friends and watching them. And, at that time, like some of my friends were really getting into it, and I appreciated it. I appreciated the technique and the mixing of ideas. I did not really like the culture, Sure. And I think we're kind of on a similar vein of that. And anyway, to make a long story short, like I've been in it for a long time, and I've seen kind of a transformation. And, you were talking about, sport jiu-jitsu and how that's different from traditional jiu-jitsu. And I think that's something that, you're probably uniquely qualified to tease out. But, just as from my perspective, I totally agree with that. Like in recent years, I've gotten more into the sport jiu-jitsu. Like when I first started out, I was more in that traditional vein,
Sure.
stuff, and more the sport jiu-jitsu is just what happened to be near me. The most qualified instructor that was near me happened to be in that kind of vein. And I've seen this focus on, well, instead of trying to submit the person, try to win the points and,
Yes.
not get swept and all this kind of stuff. And I'm interested in it to some degree, but like I also think it's creating unrealistic scenarios and like tactics, like such a focus on certain tactics. It's not like those skills that you're describing aren't there. They're just not emphasized enough that they have any
Sure.
real practice. You know, these people may practice those things like once in a while, but what they're super focused on are things that, you know, don't have that much application outside of a sparring match or a rolling match at a tournament.
Exactly. And I'm very comfortable and okay with everyone having their own like reason for being in something like jiu-jitsu. And listen, if you're someone who joins jiu-jitsu, like, listen, I just enjoy coming to the gym, getting a workout, rolling around the mats with my friends and playing these games of jiu-jitsu. Maybe once in a while I'll join a tournament, try to win a medal. And that's what it is to you. And that's what you value. That's wonderful. I mean, that's what it is to you. And that's how you're going to be valuing your experience in jiu-jitsu. If you're someone who is a bit more self-defense conscious, or someone who has the desire, like, wait a minute, I want to learn stuff that is going to give me the best opportunity to protect myself and survive a fight and maybe even come out on top, this is where things get a little bit different for me. And you know, you have to train in a different way. You're absolutely right. There are different things that are contrivances of the gym, and, you know, getting up and close to someone, bringing their head close and rolling underneath someone, where if the person were to be striking you, these tactics wouldn't quite be so effective. And
it's a really big balance, though, and I assume you would agree with this, between, you know, live training and safe training, and then, you know, self-defense, because, you know, there's kind of these two camps out there that have emerged, where you have like the really traditional martial artists who don't do any sparring, and they kind of live in this like kind of bubble of unreality, you know, like super compliant training, and they've never actually, you know, pressure tested any of their stuff. And then, you know, you have the other side of it, where you could just go like full contact every single time you spar, and in which case everyone's getting injured all the time. And, you know, like when I look at like UFC, like mixed martial artists and how often they actually compete, they may compete like once every 6 months.
yes.
You know, because after they fight, they're all like beat up and they have to go into recovery. Whereas like a Taekwondo practitioner will compete like every week. Like a high level Taekwondo practitioner will compete every single weekend. And the amount of matches they get under their belt is incredible. And so they're able to develop really high level timing and distancing, footwork, precision, understanding of the game at a very high level, because they're able to get in so many repetitions. So I feel like there's this like really fine line between sport and application, where the more you have to have some level of sport. You have to have because if you just do like full out fighting every single time, it's totally unrealistic. You have like one match a year. Whereas the more you make it in a sport, the safer it becomes, but the more unrealistic it becomes. And if you don't do any live training like that at all, then you're also in a bad place too. So it's like trying to find this like perfect medium between, you know, doing that live training, but then also keeping things fairly safe. And, you know, how to mediate that is always a very big challenge, I think, for martial arts.
It is. It's a great challenge for as an instructor when you're teaching people. And I think it really comes down to what sort of mindset and what type of culture and what are you valuing, what priorities you have, like within the academy itself. If the sport training, which again is very good because we all roll, we have a good time together. And that can go the opposite way too, because if you have everyone who's always training for competition, it breeds a culture of, again, the alpha male apex predators are like at the top of the food chain, and then all the young people that aren't quite that don't really have a place at a gym, are getting smashed constantly, and there's injuries left and right, even with a live rolling without any striking or craziness. But if you're training with a model of, well, I'm trying to do this to win the advantage or the points, or we're going to it's okay to start off on the ground, and there's no emphasis on the self-defense like technique curriculum or introducing any ideas of striking, That's where I think it becomes a bit more unrealistic. I believe, and I think there are models for this, you can teach Gracie Jiu-Jitsu in a way that is not injurious. Like you're saying, it's not MMA, it's not full go, but you're at least cognizant and aware of where are the guy's hands? What's his posture doing? If I'm on top, how am I controlling him and also understanding where his knees might be able to hit me? You're rolling with people as if they are the 99% of those out in the world that aren't jiu-jitsu practitioners. When you're playing the sport, you're playing the sport of, I know jiu-jitsu, you know jiu-jitsu, we're coming together and playing the game of jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu as self-defense is, I'm a jiu-jitsu practitioner, and 99% of the people in the world are not, and they react and behave in a very different way when they engage with you. They tear out of things, they pull out of things, they strike in certain positions, they act erratically, and the self-defense curriculum gives us the idea and the tool set to be able to manage and to mitigate their abilities to hurt us and for us to stay safe and energy efficient and practice true jiu-jitsu. So I agree with you 100%. The way that we're going to be training at our school and the way they do at other academies that are similar to this is that you just train with that self-defense mindset. You're not going out there going crazy. Even right now, when I introduce striking, I just open hand smack, light touch with the gloves, letting people know, hey, I could be striking you here. You can't let me have posture. You can't let me have the distance to hurt you. And then students, oh, okay, goodness, where if it was just a game of jiu-jitsu, I could hang out here all day with no consequences. But, you could be hitting me like most people would in the real life situation. I got to close the distance, control you a bit. And it's just more of a mindset or a culture or a technique set that we're teaching more so than just craziness. So 100% agreed. And this is how we're going to be doing it to cover the safety and also the effectiveness where everyone can do it and not be smashed. And, like having to be on like a medical sabbatical for 6 months, like a lot of MMA guys.
Well, it sounds like your program is right up my alley. I really respect what you're doing out there. I think you're a great instructor. Everything I've heard from people in Chagrin Falls, rave reviews, and I'm sure that this jiu-jitsu school is going to be no different from your Kusudo school. So, if anyone is interested in your program, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
I mean, they can reach out on our website, which is at this time kusudo.com. I don't know if you'll have links, but KUKSULDO, KusudoAcademy.com. Sorry, Academy, KusudoAcademy.com. And we also have an Instagram page for the new program. It's just simply Chagrin Falls Jiu-Jitsu. And, you can follow me on there. It's kind of what we do to update. And likewise to you. I mean, obviously, clearly, you're doing something right out there. You've got a wonderful reputation, a wonderful school, and you're doing just terrific things as a martial artist and a master. So it's an honor for me to be talking with you and for me to be on your podcast.
Yeah, well, I really appreciated you coming on. We'll have to have you on for another topic some other time. And wish you all the best.
Anytime. Right back at you. Have a great day and continue to be healthy and safe and doing what you love out there. Thank you so much for having me.